Welcome to another episode of the 5enses podcast with Robert Zinni. Today, I'll be sitting down and talking with Meg Bohrman, who is a local artist and owner of High Note Healing that serves all of the Quad City area. Meg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Can I call you Mr. Zinni?
You can call me Mr. Zinni because I've taught all three of your students at one point here, right?
All three of my children have been your students at
Right.
one point or another. So I know you as Mr. Zinni, and that's just what I'm going to do. It's comfortable.
Hey, whatever's comfortable with you. And I just want to say that I appreciate all that you have done here in Prescott so far, and just with your three students going through our school, and the talent and just the artistry that they all have brought to the table as students and as musicians around town. I just want to say thank you for being a great parent because your kids are awesome.
That is the best compliment ever. Appreciate that. They have a good dad too.
Oh yeah. Yep. Thatcher's awesome too. So you're the owner of High Note Healing. And if people don't know it, it is an array of a lot of different practices all at once. And so for our listeners out there, I want to know what is High Note Healing, or what is the mission of your company?
High Note Healing is that's the business name of my music therapy business. And it turns out I'm somebody who dabbles in lots and lots of different things. I know that there's a word for that. But what it really is it's a place to focus the healing power of music and creativity to work for healing in humans, in the earth, in our relationships in between each other, and really our relationships with ourself to ourself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found no better medium than music to act as a metaphor for how we flow in this world, how we go off on adventures, how some things are very dissonant, some things don't feel good and they vibrate too close and they can cause pain. And how then we come to a place of consonance and resonance and harmony. How we go here, we go there, we make rhythm, we make all sorts of chords and tensions, and then we release. And eventually, usually, we come home at the end. I just feel like that's a metaphor for how life flows. And that's the mission of High Note Healing, is for people to become masters and co-creators of their own lives, no matter if they're a 5-year-old little kid or a 95-year-old whoever. The whole point is to own our creativity.
Okay. So then through music, how does that help your client to own their creativity, which is life?
Which is life. Thank you for understanding. Well, I serve a very, very wide variety of clients. Sometimes we're working on a specific physical skill, right? Maybe my client has very poor grip in their left hand because of cerebral palsy or a stroke or something like that. And so we may be working on holding a mallet and hitting the drum in rhythm, right? And that because music is inherently motivating. Mm-hmm. Even if somebody doesn't identify as a musician, I used to believe there was nobody on earth who wasn't, interested and affected by music. I've met somebody who it just doesn't touch. And it does happen, but it's pretty darn rare. To be human is to love music. It's to be a musical being. And so we do specific physical things. Music has rhythm, it has beat, right? Which is what connects us to our heartbeat and to each other and to space-time. Boom, boom, boom. Often, at least in our culture, we're really removed from that element of rhythm, which translates psychologically to really being removed from knowing where our ground is, knowing where we might come from, or how to relate to ourselves in order to reach somebody else. Rhythm is what binds us in music, and it's also what I believe binds us in humanity. And so, we'll do psychological, emotional things like that, but really it's all musical, which feels better than saying psychological to me, because sometimes that feels a little bit too much under a magnifying glass. Like there's too much pathology. There's so much pathology in this world right now. I don't think any of us need to take it personally. And so music is a way to address that in an impersonal way where I don't have to feel so bad about being broken.
Okay, that's great. So when you talk about the rhythm of the world, are you talking about where it helps us meditate, or that it can affect us on a vibrational level with those sound waves? Because there's like some religious groups out there where they'll like turn for like hours upon
Yeah,
hours to
the
meditate and
Sufis,
whatnot. Or
right?
I've learned from drummers that when you can drum for a long period of time, they get that just artistry high from playing drums, and it takes them on a vibrational and spiritual level, or they go into a zone. So could you talk about how the rhythm really
Mm.
affects us?
I love that. So rhythm super affects us, right? And there's all those different ideas. But basically, I mean, to look at it in a connection way, which is how I'm looking at it right now, connecting to myself, or you connecting to your own self, and then us connecting together, blah, blah, blah. I believe it's the connection that in between that and the relationship is how we heal anything. And so rhythm is literally what holds us together in space time, right? So oh shoot, if we were together, we would be doing experiments around it, right? And one of the saddest things to me is that during this time of isolation, we can't do music together. We can share video. We can share our thoughts. We can share our feelings. We can share our visual artwork. We can share our dance and our motion. We cannot share music at the same time because of rhythm being so fundamental in vibration of what we feel. So if we were together, I would show it to you in the sense of like, here's a rhythm, very sturdy. If I were to stop right now, you would know when the next clap came.
Right.
It's extremely predictable. It it holds us. I do a lot of my music therapy in the terms of form and freedom. Or one could say masculine feminine energy, one could say yin yang energy, but really it's form and it's freedom. So form holds a space, it creates the scaffolding, you know this as a teacher very well,
Mm-hmm.
and freedom fills it up. In music, form is rhythm. That's what it is. So it's my chords on my guitar, or it's my drum beat, right? And it holds and defines the space. And when it's nice and steady, I feel, that was Cosimo, he waved to
Okay.
me. When the rhythm is strong and steady and I know what to expect, I'm held. I'm safe. I am comfortable. And when I'm held and safe and comfortable, well, I can really experiment and be
Mm.
free. So freedom really leans and depends on form, and form is rhythm. And that's true in music, but it's really true everywhere in life. And in our music therapy sessions, and I do everything from straight lessons to like deep music therapy, and it's really all the same work if you do it right. In our music therapy sessions, we play with that. We experiment with form and freedom. We realize after a lot of experimentation that if I ever have a problem with freedom, and I often do in life, it's always a function of form. Meaning I don't have enough form, I don't have enough rhythm holding me, so I'm like all over the place and don't know what to do. Or I have too much form and it's crowding me out and making me feel like I'm in a cage. And so my freedom is gone. Does that make sense at all? It's
Yeah,
very
my
abstract, but that's how I roll.
no, I agree. I like the metaphors that you're talking about. And when you talk about freedom, are you talking about the freedom from, I say, let's say, like negative thought loops or insecurities? What is the freedoms that you're talking about? That
Well, the freedom's not from anything. I
okay.
mean, we could look at it like that, right? We can play with that as much as we want. But in the true energies of form and freedom, we would say that form is yang, masculine energy. I mean, I'm sorry, I apologize, yin. And freedom is yang, that's the feminine, right? And so feminine freedom energy is flowing, it's creative, it's like kind of all over the place. For instance, if I'm going to the store
Mm-hmm.
shopping and I'm in my masculine energy or my form energy, which is pretty rare for me, I would make a list I would write down what I needed. I'd go to the store, I'd get it, I'd pay for it, I'd come home and I have everything I need. If I'm in my freedom and I go shopping, I may or may not write a list, but I know I'd forget it at home. I would go down to the store, I'd talk to people, I'd look at a lot of things that I liked, I'd buy things I didn't mean to, I'd forget things that I meant to, but I'd leave having had a great time, right? And so
Right.
that's sort of that's more of the feminine energy that, and then versus the form energy. And so the two dance together. And that's another way I like to look at it is, so imagine ballroom dancers, right? The man would be form. And for years, it looked to me like the men did nothing in ballroom dancing, right? Looked like they just kind of stood there and moved their feet a little bit. But really what men are doing in ballroom dancing is making different forms. And by the flick of a wrist or a turn of the hip, he is communicating how she, as freedom, flips around, gets flown up in the air, wears her sequins that sparkle, twirls, all the things that make it so beautiful. But she couldn't do it without him holding the form. And he couldn't look that beautiful without her twirling around. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense.
It's
Yeah.
like it's the energies of creation,
Hmm.
really.
No, I like that you're talking about the different energies because it's not about, let's say, gender. It's about the energies that you feel. Because when
Thank you for
you're going
saying
through,
that.
yeah, because when you're going through life, sometimes I feel more like masculine energy or feminine energy in it, and they both manifest in different aspects of my life. And over the course of my adulthood, I was able to just identify that through practices and through learning different therapies or psychologies. And it really helped me just to be like, I guess, just like weighing in or just experiencing both different energies because they manifest in different ways. And I was just wondering, how does your clients or how does your clients feel about the energy work that you do? Are they a little put off as like, oh, I have masculine and feminine, or do they pretty much can get the grasp the concepts and figure out how to use that energy through
Well,
their.
that's a good question because I am a little bit out there, according to mainstream America, I have been told anyway.
Oh, okay.
And yes, yes. And I certainly practice different than other music therapists that I know. And I don't think there's anything off-putting about exploring the energies. Especially when you're doing, again, you're coming back to music, right? And so all we're doing is playing. We're playing music. Exploration is play with a little bit of intention, right? And so I think you're specifically referring to the gender question,
Yeah.
because that is a really big question. In our culture, we equate masculine and feminine energy with male or female, and they're completely different things, right? We are completely made up of both energies. And that's why I prefer saying yin yang, or in my studio, we say form freedom for that same reason. But I came to a lot of this energy work in the masculine feminine realm by delivering babies. I'm not a midwife, but I'm a doula and a childbirth educator. And that's one of the times in life, most of the time our masculine feminine is swirling within us all the time, right? And very few times does it polarize, but it polarizes in sexuality. That's when it polarizes. So in making love, in giving birth, in all sorts of ways where we're dealing with sexuality or creative energy, because that's the same thing, right?
Mhm.
That's when it polarizes. And so I needed to learn that. And I learned it from watching the way that my mothers and fathers worked together and what women needed to give birth. And it turns out it's the same energies that we need in order to heal, in order to create. We need to feel safe, a nice strong form and rhythm, but not overcrowded. And we need to have that feeling of safety in order to open, to give birth and what I was just talking about, but also to create and to write and to play, but also to heal. Because if we do not feel safe and held, we don't have the ability to be courageous, to dive deep into our soul and to learn who we are. I mean, that takes really knowing how to hold ourselves and feeling safe with the people we're with.
I totally agree with you. And like, I always look at it as somebody jumping off into the abyss. Like, it's scary when you are having that metaphorical cliff and you're just looking down into the unknown or your deep, dark secrets of your soul. And it's that trust, but also what you're talking about is safety, that you can trust yourself to go into all those emotions that you're going to experience, all those energies, just to do some self discovery. But also, I personally see that it's a risk, but also you need to be very courageous in going through that self exploratory, especially if you're going deep inside, because sometimes what you find deep dark in your soul, it could be, you know, that little child, that wounded soldier, if you will, or somebody that you may not want to look in the mirror, but it's those things that make you grow in a way. So that's great that you're, you know, diving deep with your clients with that.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about your clients for a second, Meg. So you said that you help give birth, but also you help with the elderly population. And so I know that you have them, or what your profession does is help them sometimes assist through those life thresholds. And so I was wondering, what can you describe what a life threshold is, and then how do you approach certain thresholds with your clients? Because, like I said, it's fascinating that your profession gives you from birth to death, and you get to see all that emotion, all those energies, but also all those like processes of life that normal people on a day-to-day basis don't see that until they experience it.
Mm, Mr. Zinni, I
Yeah.
love that you asked me that.
Okay.
I almost called you Robert.
Ooh, no, you can't do that. No Roberts here. Just
Let's not do
Mr. Z.
that.
Yep. No.
So I am so blessed. I feel so grateful that this is what life has called me to do. And it really has. You know, I've had a very circuitous route in everything I do, it feels like, because I moved from the inside out. And it I went to school to get my music therapy degree when I was already, you know, the age of the mother of all the other students, that kind of thing. But I've been practicing on my own for years. But what are these thresholds? Is that the question? And
Yeah.
how do we specifically cross them?
Hmm.
Question.
Yes.
So the thresholds, I think that we would, in our modern Western world, we don't have rites of passages anymore, right? And it's one of the greatest losses for our species and for our soul, because it's in those moments of life changes, big life changes. In other cultures and previously in our ancestors, we would mark them as a rite of passage. We would mark them with some sort of ceremony to say, this is sacred. This becoming a mother, this becoming a father, this transition from maiden to mother, this is a sacred time. This deep healing, this being pulled down to the depths of cancer or corona now, and finding your way out, that is a sacred thing. And when we mark such moments as sacred, not only can we integrate them for ourselves, but what it does is when a culture marks a moment as sacred, it's marking the person who's been on a journey as somebody who has a gift for us. It gives people, first of all, the rite of passage gives those going over the threshold a map of how to get there, right? How do you become a woman in our culture? Maybe a little bit easier than how to become a man in our culture. Because women, we have our bodies that do stuff to us anyway. For men, it's pretty driftless.
I
And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I totally agree with that. And I think through North Point and then working a little bit as a mentor with Boys to Men, because I know that your
Boys to
husband
Men
Thatcher is a
rocks.
part of that too.
Mhm.
That's when I really realized that we have to honor these rites of passages. But as a teenage male going through society right now, it is a tough road to walk on, because again, where is that point where it signifies you are a man, you're a boy transitioning to a man? You could say it's your driver's license, it could be your first job, But I
First
agree.
credit card, we're in America. That's our rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
We're now a good consumer.
Right. So I just wanted to say I agree that I as a male walking through this Western world, I can't identify any of those rites of passages, but like with organizations like Boys to Men, they help them identify the transition from a boy to a man. And unfortunately, like that is kind of true. So
Yeah. Well, and that's I guess my approach in the world
mhm.
at large, and certainly in my work, is that I'm here really to have one foot in this world of the known world and one foot in the unknown, and I'll help you cross. Nobody can really walk by your side as you're going to the underworld. That's a solo journey. However, I can really hold the threshold. And what we were saying before, to have that form to feel safe, that's really what a rite of passage is. It's creating the safe form so that the people going through the healing, going through the process, going through the deep dive, know their way home, know that we're there holding the light for them. And music and art, there's nothing better. There's nothing better for that kind of exploration, because it tells us stories. This is not the first time around. What goes on in my inner life is pretty much what goes on in everybody's inner life. It's my own unique story on top of it. And so I have my own childhood traumas to deal with, my own experiences, my own health, my own loves, my own hates, my own whatever. And the human story is the human story. So that for me is a big part of the work I do, is trying to help people in the modern world remember their soul and remember that they're not alone. It's pretty hard to heal when we feel like there's something so wrong with us. We can't even wade our way through the shame to start working on clearing it, because we've been told we are so wrong from so many directions, right? From our original childhood traumas, from the media telling us we don't look right, we don't sound right, we don't feel good, we're too dark, or we're too light, or we're too heavy, or we're too skinny, or we're too short, or we're too tall, or we're too ugly, or we're too rich, or we're too poor. It doesn't matter. We're just always broken. And that's no, mistake. It's a way to get people to spend more money. We know this. It's a control thing when you study power. But all I really want in my mission, my intention, is to help people learn who they are.
Mm.
And when you hold space and help people through that deep healing and over the thresholds, they start to learn who they are. And you're absolutely right. You go deep, dark into your own soul, you meet your ugly self. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. And I go so far as to say that's where death happens. We have to have a little soul. Something in our ego must die in order for us to have something born and bring back in a creative way. So this is deep. This all has to do with my hero's journey work that I do as well. And that's a big part of the music therapy. Is I've written a 13-song cycle called The Hero's Journey in Song. And it's looking at different archetypes, which are energies along the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is an old story, but Joseph Campbell first named it that. And you can explore that as much as you want. But it's all about creativity and soul exploration and learning how to share what's inside to come out. And so I do monthly groups where you don't just get to come and talk. You have to come prepared with a creative piece. And oh my goodness, the things that some of these women, and I only work with women right now, maybe I'll extend it to men. I don't know. Maybe that's your job.
Okay.
They bring, I've had like women who don't identify as artists in any way come to these groups. And the art that comes out of them, the beauty, the creativity, the exploration, and what they share, oh, what a gift.
Nice. And so is there any hesitation with your clients or the people that you work with at first? And how do you allow them to start feeling safe to explore those different entities in their mind? Because when you're talking about the ego that has to die, I agree, but I also had that theory that, you know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I always feel there's also that duality too, where, you know, for every good in the person, there's always that bad in that person. And maybe that's the shadow energy that I was trying to talk about earlier about the deep steps. But does your clients have any issues with exploring? And if so, like, how do you help them guide their journey?
Well, whenever there's a light shining, there's a shadow cast.
Okay.
And the bigger the person, the bigger the ego. I'm a very big person and very big personality and with a very big ego. I cast a big shadow, you know? And in order to be a conscious co-creator of life, we need to be aware of our light and our shadow. Most of us are aware of aspects of our light, but very few of us want to confront our shadow. And we don't know how. I mean, again, it goes back to the rite of passage, and the maps are not there and we haven't been shown. But once we start doing it, it's actually not quite as scary as we thought. But how do I approach it in the first place with clients? Well, it just depends on the client,
Okay.
you know, because sometimes I'm doing shadow work with 5-year-olds, right? They don't know. I don't use words like that. I wouldn't use, like, you know, with a cancer patient, I wouldn't say, okay, now your ego's got to die. Like, there's certain words you wouldn't do with certain people, right?
Yeah.
Or even with birth, because it's a big fear for women, right? So the language really does matter. And I think I consider myself a poet probably more than anything else that I would consider myself if I were to label myself. So I've been doing poetry since I can remember speaking. and so I think knowing poetry matters because you have choice of words. But honestly, it's about listening.
Mm.
Music therapy, or, you know, music like life, I like to say to my clients, as music as in life, listening is the greatest teacher. It's the most important skill to be good at, to be an excellent musician. But the most important skill to be good at, to be an excellent human as well, is how to listen. And I work at a rehab place that's an all women's recovery from drugs and alcohol. It's a really wonderful place, one of the few that hires music therapists, right? Because a lot of places will just kind of make up their own, which is fine, you know, as long as it works. But you should hire me. Actually, don't, because I got too much work. But the point is, working with these women who are really focusing on healing, like they're in rehab, right? It is, what a treat. What an incredible treat to work with people whose entire focus is on healing. You know, it's a special place. But what were we talking about before I mentioned the rehab?
How do you help them, like, kind of ease into the process of healing or
Oh, the
expressing
listening.
themselves?
I
Yeah, the
think it's the
listening.
listening. I think it was the listening that took me there. Because I'll say to these women, they're people who we can go really deep with, like I said, because that's how the group is set up, right? That's how it's framed. And so we'll talk about listening. And then they're like, well, what do I listen to? I've got 10,000 voices in my head. And I'm like, listen to them all. Start noticing who they are. Which voice in your head is telling you the truth? Is any of them? Is there a voice that's speaking from your heart? Can you listen to what I'm thinking and feeling right now? If I'm totally silent, can you hear me? Can you hear my energy? Can you hear my vibration? And what I have found is there's lots of different ways to listen. It's like a muscle. It's like you're a runner. So it's like the more you run, the
Yep.
better you get at it and the stronger your muscles develop. It's the same with listening. I can now, like, throw my listening muscle around and hear somebody on the other side of a crowded room and hear them directly what they're saying because I've practiced it. I can hear the rhythm, the form, and the freedom, and all the different things that flow together, and this person's anger, and this person's resistance, and this person's complete joy and ecstasy, all happening within this music making moment, if that makes sense. And I think my biggest practice in life is listening. So when we listen, we are creating form, if that makes, we are creating a space through our energy of listening, which is also deep presence.
Right. And you were talking about holding that space. So when you talk about holding that space, are you talking about just holding the space to listen for those people that are in need of healing? To give
Yeah,
them, it's basically give them a platform to share their feelings and express
right.
themselves, correct?
Right. But the deeper, if you're with somebody who's really good at listening, practiced at it,
Mm-hmm.
the way I like to put it is that I listen underneath what you're telling me. I listen deeper than you're even speaking. I'm listening to your heart. I'm listening to your soul. And when I hold a space that in that direction, in that way, in that ability of deep listening, which is the same as presence. I'm going to just say that again. Deep listening and presence are exactly the same energy. Am I right here with you? And when you listen and are that present with somebody, all the baloney falls away. It just falls away. And there's no forcing. I'm not cajoling people. I'm not good at that. To say, come on, let's go here. I know, and I know many therapists will do that and direct things a little bit more that way. I find that I can listen deeply and with one word or here or there, maybe say, well, really? Did you hear what you just said to yourself? How much are you listening to yourself? So I encourage people to listen to themselves at that same deep level. They go deep. Humans want to.
Mm-hmm.
What if you, I find when I trust myself completely within that space, they go there. There isn't an issue. And if there is, they probably don't come back and see me again. They'll
That would
find a
suck,
different music therapist.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to touch a little bit about psychology with you. So you're talking about the different voices in their heads. Now, if somebody doesn't know that type of work, they may call it like schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder or something like that. But when you have somebody that's talking about these different voices in their head, how can you get them, or what's the process of them understanding it's the different versions of themselves? Or someone once told me it's like we wear these different masks in life, and so if I have this thought, right, it could be negative, then it could be this one mask that I wear. So I just want to know, like, how can people just like try to sift through all those voices? And I always have this also saying too, just because you think it or just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true, right?
I love
So
that.
so can you talk to a little bit about the different voices that are in our heads and like, you
Boy, can I. I got voices in my head.
know,
Oh, I love that. That's really beautiful. It just reminds me, I always tell a different story to all the kids. I have 3 kids, as you know them all. And I will say, well, blah, blah, blah. That's the reason why I fell in love with daddy. But one of the stories is that he was the first person who said that to me.
oh really?
I was having a moment. Who knows what I had been experimenting with? I was young. Okay. I met this man when I was 16. And anyway, I was having a hard time, and I was saying, there's all these terrible thoughts in my head. And he said, oh, Meg, those are just thoughts. They don't belong to you. They're just moving through the air. Don't worry about it. And so I didn't have to hold them. I didn't have to attach to them. They didn't have to define me. And that was one of the most amazing ahas of my young life, right? And so that's why I married him. Also, it turns out to be true. I teach at Primavera School. I teach music over there just one morning a week. And I've been trying to do some online songs with the kids for what it's worth. But one thing, a couple years ago, the first graders and I wrote a song called Don't Believe Everything You Think. And the reason is because, man, I love these kids. Hang on, I'm grabbing an instrument.
Okay.
Am I? Oh,
Are
yeah,
you?
am I? Here's one. And because they come in, they were just the most argumentative, like, Mimi said this about me, and Mimi said this about me. And they were just so like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've just been discussing all sorts of things because for some reason kids like to tell me everything. And you know why? Because I listen. You walk through life as a listener. I walked into I don't know, it was a few months ago, I walked into a gas station, and the woman who was working there, I'd never met her before. She just started like pouring herself into me, and she was it turns out she's dying, and just had all this stuff going on in her world and just needed somebody to hear her. We must have people to hear us. We must have validation for who we are in our life, or we will have no healing. And so she sensed that about me. It seems to be that way most places in my life,
Mm-hmm.
because You don't need to say, oh, I listen. People feel it. People feel it as a presence. Okay, but this, don't believe everything you think. Let me see. I don't know if it'll translate over Zoom.
All right, let's test it out.
I can only do a little bit. Don't believe everything you think. No, no, no. Don't believe everything you think. You think you're right, but you might be wrong. You think you're big, but you know that you're strong. I don't know. I don't remember the words. I could look it up and play it. But it's so much fun. It's like this blues song, and it's really fun to write songs with kids because I can get attached to a song I'm writing and be like, want it to go a direction, and then they'll put in something like totally ridiculous into the song. Really
well, that's such a strong message for little kids to understand that just because you think something or have a thought.
Wouldn't that have been great to know when you were 6? I wish I had somebody told that to me. I'd have saved me so much suffering.
And it's like you were talking about, it's that hold, like when you have a conflict with a coworker or even with a friend, that's where grudges are started, because you hold and you need that safe space like you've been talking about to release that. And I don't know, like again, I just think that's a great message. I think a lot of the issues that we have as humans could go all away if we just let that go or not hold on to it, right?
Well, and the thing is, somehow we're made to feel things so incredibly deeply, and as much as we may practice the 4 agreements, take things personally and all that kind of stuff, right? And as much as I have, like, my whole life is dedicated to healing and knowing who I am and relationships, I still get stuck in it. I mean, this COVID time of isolation, oh my goodness, is my brain going woo, and thank the goddess for my family, because they put me in my place. They listen to me, and then they say, oh, no, I don't notice that happening, and we need each other. We must have each other. And I was going to respond to something else you just said about that. The validation, the listening, I don't know. But I do know that I have a deep, deep desire that we teach psychological health, emotional health, emotional intelligence beginning at birth, because we need to. We are so deeply emotional as human beings. And even people are like, I'm not emotional. They're so crazy emotional. They're just stuffing it down so it comes out sideways and it's even worse, right?
No, yeah.
And if we were able, you were talking about holding on to resistances. It's like, just having that validation, knowing who we are, knowing our tendencies, knowing how to process things, and then knowing how to listen for others. That's where it was going with that needing to have validation, is that I feel very, very strongly that I would like to live in a world where I was out of a job, where my services are no longer needed. Because what is music therapy? Okay, so maybe I can teach you your instruments, like I'm a great music teacher. But as a therapist, what is a therapist? It's somebody who knows how to listen and hold up a mirror to you. And if we do that for each other, whether we're family members, whether we're friends, whether we're strangers like that lady in the gas station, if we know how to walk through life as people who listen and express, who give and receive gracefully, we don't need to have all this psychoanalysis everywhere.
No.
And because there can be a little bit of detriment to it. There can be too much magnifying glass.
Oh, definitely with the magnifying glasses. And what I've found out in my adult life is social media and being around screens definitely warps my point of view. Like there's been points in my life, because as a person that's creating content, at some point, like it seems like my anxiety is right after I release something.
Yeah, totally.
I only know that a couple hundred people may see that because that's as many friends that I have on social media, but I'm just so anxious getting that out there. And then it seems like if I allow it to spiral down with those thoughts, then I can really lose myself with like releasing the content, because I'm trying to look into a black mirror or trying to get validation with that. So going back to the question about like people with autism, I was trying to allude to that some scientists are saying that because there's not that social aspect of their brain, they might be the next step of evolution, and they'll be able to do their jobs better, whatever that is. Do you have
How many people on on the spectrum or with autism are telling this story?
I don't know.
Or these are people talking about
these are
people.
like psychologists and
Mhm.
sociologists that
Yeah.
I.
One could
Yeah.
see that parallel with artificial intelligence and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
However, the people I know who have autism or on the spectrum, they want nothing more than an ability to communicate with other humans. Sort of
Mm.
like Data on Star Trek. Like he just wanted to be human, you know?
Right.
And there's a really big truth to that, because we debate all the time where autism comes from and all these different things. But what it feels like mostly is a block in processing up here, but it does not stop the heart. It does
Mm-mm.
not stop the longing for soul connection. And so, especially as I work with people with autism as they get older and have more and more self-awareness, there's a lot of grief for them around not connecting with other people,
Mm.
and or not knowing how, or feeling blah blah blah, and the part of that's just our addiction to being broken that we are in our culture. We're habituated to not never being good enough, right? And so they have that as well. And maybe, and there's just no doubt that there are special gifts that people with autism bring us. No doubt. To be able to see the world through that kind of lens is a completely different perspective that we all need. And yet to say, well, this is the new way humans go, sounds very cynical to me,
Mm.
and sounds
Okay.
like somebody speaking from their trauma. As a therapist, that's what I would say. And that, to me, that means, we're all trauma. We all have trauma. We're born in trauma. I hope babies be born. And it doesn't matter if it's the most beautiful, chilled out, quiet, candlelit home birth in a pool. It's still traumatic. It is hard to be born. It is hard to give birth.
Mhm.
That's how it is. We're too big to fit through such a small opening. And that's often how I experience life, is that my soul is too big. It's too infinite to fit in this tiny finite body, right? And so it's just always uncomfortable, always uncomfortable. And that's why it's a dance. Like, you can never stay too long in one place, or I feel smothered. And that's how it works in my world anyway.
Mhm.
So I think it's a little bit dangerous to say that, oh yeah, we don't really need people. We're just going to be isolated beings. And, you know, okay. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. That's been said for a long. I mean, you can look at old philosophers who were all pissed off and coming from their own wound and said the same thing, right? But it's true, there's more people being born with autism. And so we have to say, why is that? What is life telling us about their vision? And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot. There's a
Oh yeah.
lot. But it's certainly not an ideal. We have these wounds, and when, the wound is how we open. It's the opening that you're talking about diving into, like you're
Mhm.
talking metaphorical cliff, but basically it's diving into our own wound. It's how we touch our soul, and it's about being vulnerable. We are losing the old art of vulnerability.
Mm.
We do not have that. You know Brene Brown's work, probably. Do you know
Oh,
her work?
I think so.
Brene Brown, she's associated I think in Houston or down, I don't know, some Texas place. I'm from Texas, by the way, so I'm saying that with love. But she does TED Talks, she writes books, and her whole work is research in vulnerability. Fascinating, beautiful work.
Okay.
Because I guess I feel like that's my work, right? It's coming back again to the idea of safety, holding form and rhythm, or just holding form and presence, and how deeply I'm listening, because people can't be vulnerable unless they feel safe. And so when we have as many wounds as we do, and we're getting more every single day in a culture that is cut off from the earth, cut off from the soul, cut off from each other, who doesn't know how to identify all the different voices in our head without labeling ourselves as insane, right? Who's just so addicted and habituated to negativity at this point. We have trauma after trauma after trauma building up. And unless we can look at ourselves and learn to hold ourselves in love, the eyes of nurturing. I talk a lot with my students and my clients about the archetypal predator. We talk about the judge. And really to speak back just really quickly about, you said, well, how do I introduce these ideas without getting people's back up or scaring them or whatever? These are archetypal ideas. I used to work at an eating disorders clinic down in Wickenburg for some years, and I would do these humongous groups, and I would come in and I would ask, always have a check-in question, like, how is your warrior doing today? How is your relationship with your inner warrior? These are people who've never spoken what I call arcus speak, never talked it before, never had it introduced to them before. Very mainstream in the way they do their, psychiatry and everything like that. Mine feels much more art and story based and relationship based. But you bring those words to people, they get it. They get it immediately. And so it's the same when I talk with my clients about the judge or the predator. There's a part of the human psyche that wants to devour anything new, anything fresh and green, any new sprout in the springtime right now. It's the part that creeps into the nests at night and eats all the baby birds and the eggs, right? Anything of beauty will go, bless you.
Thank you.
And that is within all of us. I notice it in me. Mine's a little bit big. So that's in part why, that's probably the biggest reason I do the work I do, is so I can understand how to keep my own predator at bay, because I'm such a creative person. But we live in a society that doesn't define it, doesn't talk about it, and yet is the most judgmental society, I think, in history. I know we've had lots of judgmental societies, but basically we are detached from our bodies and our heads. We value only the head. Our bodies are where emotions live. Our bodies where creativity lives, in that sense of action and doing and making and being juicy, and connection in our heart. It's in our body, not in our head. Our head, like, don't believe everything you think, is thinking and telling us stories all the time. Some of them helpful, some of them not helpful. But then, you know what I mean? And so the idea of the predator is the fact that most of us in this world don't even try to be creative, don't even try to do one thing new, because we're so afraid of failure.
Yeah.
And like in my world of music, people come to me all the time and they say, Meg, I can't sing. And I'm like, well, there's this reason, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, no, Meg, I can't sing. My choir teacher in church told me just to mouth the words. And the kind of wound that gives people, we do over and over. Singing's the biggest one. It's true with all creativity, but singing is the biggest one in our culture. And I used to work on the Grand Canyon Railroad, and it was such a great job. There's people from all over the world, and my job, as I saw it, I don't know if it's how my boss saw it, as I saw it, was to weave them together in that moment of space-time, spontaneous community. It's my favorite thing to do in the world. It's how do we connect each other when we're so separate? I would see all these people, and 99% of them would tell me, Meg, I don't sing. I don't, and that's statistically impossible to have that many people unable to sing. Now, I know there's people who are better or worse at it, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, we don't sing because people have stolen our voices. We have been told the predator has eaten our voice. And singing is the most vulnerable act. It is. It's the most vulnerable expression of our authentic voice. And to do that in this society is almost crazy. It's almost a crazy thing to do, because you're just, like you said, as a creator yourself. And I don't know if you're putting out your own music and stuff too, but any act of creation for the world, you're just opening yourself right up. And so we don't do it. We don't sing. We don't do music. We don't do art, but especially the singing, which is the biggest loss, I think, for our culture, because that's how we connect to soul. We don't have to be thinking about it. We can be, just the regular old stockbroker. But if we have a singing practice, we will be connected with our soul.
No, I agree. That's why I love karaoke. Like, you don't have to, you don't have to be good at singing, And when everything that you're talking about, Meg, I want to go back to what you're talking about. It's about open up with vulnerability. And even the word vulnerability has, I think, some sort of negative connotation in our society. Like, a lot of people don't want to be vulnerable. I've noticed that when it is hard for people to welcome vulnerability. And I
Mm.
don't know where that is coming from in our society, because like you said, you can be creative and you're always vulnerable. You, whether it's painting, singing, making videos, right? You're going out, you're putting yourself out there for the world, you know. But I've always wondered why do people shy away from being vulnerable? Like, you're just trying to be honest with yourself, right, Meg? Do you know anything about people shying away from vulnerability?
Well, I have a lot of ideas about it because that's the work I'm in,
I know,
right?
right? Yeah, it all makes
And
yeah.
it all makes sense. And really, I do the work I do because, I mean, I didn't think about it, it just kind of happened to me, but it's because it saves my life,
Mm.
right? I would literally not be alive if I hadn't found a way to release my creativity, which was not taught to me. In fact, the other was taught. And so a big part of it is the fact that we have it modeled. Like if you don't grow up in a creative family, it's a lot more difficult to know how to release it, because even the most well-rounded people are going to have that vulnerability, like anxiety, when they release anything. For a moment, it doesn't keep us from doing it, but it's there, right? So that's one, is that it's just simply not modeled. But then you ask, well, what is modeled? What is the story of the United States of America?
Well,
What is our grand mythology, right? Because that's truly what we live on. That is what everybody is living and breathing, whether they know it or not. Mostly they don't know it, because as soon as you know it, you can start changing the story and being a co-creator, being a co-author. Author is the authority of your life, right? And so until we can kind of identify the story we're in, or the water we're swimming in, we're going to be defined by its rules. And the story that we are in is a story of military might. It's a story of oppression over people who have been vulnerable. It's a story of separateness, like those scientists you were talking about, like everybody in their own little castle with a big barrier in the way. It's a story, we have this grand narrative that, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just get on with it and make your mark, right?
mhm.
Well, that might be true for the anomaly, but it seems to only be true with people who have good means to come from, right? I mean, I came from a middle class family, and I've had nothing but help in the world of material wealth. So that's not an issue for me. Thank you. Thank you, abundance. However, if I did not come from that family, I would not be able, no matter how talented I was, how many bootstraps I pulled up, I would not have the opportunities to be seen. So that's clearly a myth, right? Anybody can be president. Oh, really? These are stories we love to tell in our culture because they're our mythology. They're what we believe. But the story really, really says, and it's the same with femininity. It's like put down what, if we go back to masculine, feminine, vulnerability, openness, which is the same thing. That's a feminine value. That's a freedom value, right? That is not holding it. The story we have I would look at as a wounded masculine story, one that must control instead of guide, like the dancer I was talking about, right? It would be somebody who's controlling the feminine and the freedom, like, right? And we do not value vulnerability. You're absolutely correct. Because why? It's painful. There are so few people who have the courage to feel their pain and do it anyway. It's painful. It's like giving birth every time you do something creative. In a mini way, it's a giving birth, right? You don't do it without some trauma. And so because don't know ourselves, and we don't have self-awareness, and we don't have rites of passage, we just live in this grand myth that might is right. And so when you live in that story as a culture, in a society, there's no way to disprove it, because we're coming from that perspective. And might will every single time step on the ant. If you got nice combat boots on, you can smush any ant you like because they're vulnerable. And so it just the story plays itself out over and over. Whatever story you believe, you play out. And our society believes that. They do not believe in vulnerability. But I have a deep feeling that this time of COVID is really about grief. It's about processing grief. I do a lot of grief work with people. I worked hospice for years, and grief to me feels like it's one of our places of being stuck. To experience and feel grief, we must be vulnerable. To experience any deep, true emotion, we must open to it and be vulnerable. We can't be defending ourselves at the same time as feeling grief. It doesn't happen, right? So if we live in this world where we don't touch our emotions, we don't know how to be vulnerable, grief upon grief, upon hurt, upon trauma, upon shame boils up, we're never going to have the strength to look in that. We have to unpack it little by little. And that's what I mean about everybody being each other's therapists. It's just that we're mirroring each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we own that, we don't have to live in this story. This story is not life affirming. Life is vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. No, wow. I really like what you were just saying right there, Meg. I mean, life is being vulnerable. Life is going through the process and experiencing the thresholds that we were talking about earlier. And I just wanted to say thank you for being our guest today on this Zoom inner.
It's been so fun. Thank
It's
you for
great.
inviting me. I would like to say that I have some projects I wanted to tell you about. What are they? Oh, so Thatcher and I just did a video together. I wrote and recorded a song, which is from my hero's journey, because you were going back to the hero's journey over and over. We can talk at length about that. But it's a song. It's about a moment of clarity when everything. Those times, the aesthetic times when everything comes together in oneness, and that's what the song's about. And it's a song about listening. It's listening to everybody's voice, the trees and the worms and the rooster down the road, all that kind of thing, right? Listening to the voice of the wind, and how when you listen to the diversity and the beauty of everything, it really then you feel the oneness. It's the paradox of life. Please go to my highnotehealing.com or thirdroadtheater.com, and there'll be links there to go see it and do different things.
Okay. We'll put all the links in the description below, so that way people who are clicking on our content, especially to hear about High Note Healing with Meg, they can be guided as well. And so again, thank you for being a part of this podcast. Again, this is Robert Zinni, wrapping up another 5enses podcast with owner, artist, and local community member Meg Bohrman from High Note Healing. For more information, y'all can go to 5enses, mag.com, like us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And like I said, we'll be providing all the links to see what Meg's up to, whether it's performing or healing, in the links below.